The first question I'd have for you is explain the origins of the line, failing to prepare is preparing to fail.
Well, it's pretty simple. You know, when I was a kid, we grew up in a normal house, like everyone else. My dad was a hardworking blue-collar Bell telephone worker, and my mother was a stay-at-home mother that raised 5 children. So we didn't really have a whole lot in the sense of finances, but what we had a whole lot was tremendous support from both parents in whatever endeavors we wanted to participate in, whether it be ice hockey, baseball, box lacrosse, etc. And my dad was a big believer that that sports for kids was such a great avenue in the sense that it taught you so much about life, you know, how to work hard, how to be unselfish, how to have teammates, how to understand what losing is, understanding winning under pressure. And all those things that you do in sports are going to be part of the real world one day and part of the real life. And more importantly, he always felt that if kids participated, it kept them away from free time. And he always felt that free time was a reason for kids getting themselves into trouble and doing things they probably shouldn't be doing at 14, 15, 16. So that was his big thing. And with that, he used to say to me all the time, he didn't understand or know why I was blessed with so much God-given talent, but he really drilled into me that I was fortunate and I was lucky and not to waste it. And so practice and preparation were a huge part of what he sort of drilled into my brain from the time I was 4, 5, 6 years old. And the fortunate thing for me was I had a love and a passion. I didn't practice sort of to become the next Gordie Howe or Bobby Orr. I practiced and did the things I did because I loved it. And of course, like every other kid, you have this dream of playing in the NHL, but that dream is really tough to make into reality. So my preparation was always as good as I could make it, and always, I at least knew that each and every game that I went into, I was physically and mentally going to be at the best I could possibly be at.
I want to talk to you about your dad and growing up, coming up, but I also wanted to touch on first just your playing days, and you had some kind of, it seemed like, quirks when you were playing, one of which was your pregame routine and getting dressed the same way for every game. Explain that.
Well, listen, my dad was a big believer that part of being a good athlete was not just practice and not just physically preparing, but to be mentally prepared, whether it be the proper rest the day before or the day of, proper nutrition, proper diet. He really was a big believer that if you didn't have a proper meal the night before, that physically you couldn't be at your best. And so from a young age, even at 6 when I was playing minor hockey, the day before and the day of, he made sure that I ate properly, and that didn't mean, hot dog or French fries. That meant having either, whether it was pasta or chicken or steak or potatoes. He was a big believer in that. And so I never changed my routine my entire career, my entire life. And with that comes, you can say it's superstition, you can say it's routine, how you get dressed. And I got dressed the same way all the time. I always got dressed on the right side, my right sock, my right shin pad, my right elbow pad, my right skate. Just, you can say it's superstition, but it was partly routine also.
You were talking about your diet, and I mean, stats speak for themselves. You're the most dominant athlete of any sport ever, and I would have thought when, reading about you, you had this, really unique, specific diet, but then I saw you would sometimes have 4 hot dogs before a game with onions and mustard, or pie, or Diet Coke, or it just wasn't the diet kind of you would expect for the
the normal person.
I mean, for somebody with your ability.
Well, first of all, he was a big believer that having steak and potato, a vegetable, a salad was the most important meal. Whether it be the night before lunchtime of. He was a really big believer that you needed to get those carbohydrates and all that in your body a good 12 to 24 hours before you participated, whether I was playing box lacrosse or baseball or ice hockey. So, when I played junior hockey, we went to school. We went to school to 3:15, 3:30. So you don't really get a whole lot of time to eat. You race home. At that point in time, for a 7 o'clock or 7:30 game, I was eating steak and potato and all that at 4:30, 5 o'clock before I went to the arena. So when I turned pro at 17, obviously the schedule and the lifestyle is completely different. There's no school. You skate in the morning. You have a light skate to prepare for that night. And generally, guys eat somewhere between 12:30 and 1:30. And then sort of rest or sleep or nap or whatever you do to get ready for the game. But I always found that by 4:30, 5 o'clock, I was starving because my routine was I used to eat at 4:35. So I would eat at 12:30 like everyone else, but I always found that by 5 o'clock I was hungry. So depending on what city we're in, if it was Chicago, there'd be pizza in the building. If it was Quebec City, there'd be hot dogs. And some cities, it was sandwiches. And in those days, we didn't have power bars and we didn't have Gatorade or Powerade, the energy drinks. And for me, I drank Diet Coke. I found that to be the same sort of stimulation as an energy drink. And we had chocolate bars. We didn't have power bars. So if I had a Snickers or any kind of a chocolate bar, I found that gave me energy. And sometimes it lasted throughout the game, and then other times I'd be hungry after the first period or the second period, and I'd have a half a sandwich or just something to give me that little bit of energy. And I never changed from the time I was 6. So I think my body and physically and mentally, I just got so used to it, I had to have it.
I understand when you were playing in the NHL, you could tell if the stick was an eighth of an inch shorter or a quarter of an ounce off, or the Bauer skate blades were just minimally different. How true is that?
No, it's pretty true. It's like, anything else becomes second nature to you because that's your life. I mean, I was in skates as much as I was in probably walking shoes. I was holding a hockey stick as much as I was wearing a toque. You just get so comfortable and so used to it. And, it's no different than probably a baseball player, George Brett, the feel of his baseball bat. Whether it's a guy like Jack Nicklaus with his golf club, if you do it every single day and you grow up doing it all the time, it just becomes second nature to you. And it's not something that I can sit here and say I'm an expert on, but I was an expert on my own equipment and what I felt comfortable with, whether it was my skates, my shin pads, my hockey stick. Consequently, you get so used to it that if there's any kind of a minimal change, it's recognizable, and so kind of throws you off.
Although when you were 5 years old, you could have played against the 10-year-olds, you were prevented from doing so. So at 6 years old, you were playing against the 10-year-olds. At 14 years old, you were playing against, I think, some 20-year-olds. What do you think allowed you to do that?
Oh, first of all, when I was 5, when I tried out for the team, in those days, minor hockey, I think it's called Adam now, it was called novice. That was the first team you played on, 9 and 10-year-olds. So if I was going to make a team, a travel team, that was the team I had to make.
What are they saying when a little 5-year-old shows up to practice?
Well, I think they were in shock because I actually made the team. And I just think they thought I was a smaller player because when they asked my dad for my birth certificate, they kind of chuckled and said, well, he can't play. He's too young, which was pretty unique. And I can remember it was almost like it was yesterday, my dad and I sitting there and said, you can't play. So there was some discussion. There was a little town about 10 minutes outside of our town that I could have played on that team. But had I played on that team at 5, I would have had to stay on that team throughout my minor hockey career. And at 5 and 6 and 7, it would have been okay, but by the time I got older, it wouldn't have been the right fit for me because they were basically a level below my hometown. So basically went from AA. I would have been playing A hockey, which wouldn't have been good for me. So we chose to not play that year. I went back the next year and I made the team. And probably the success I had on that team, and I didn't play a lot. I scored 1 goal. It wasn't like I dominated and lit it up, but I scored 1 goal my first year. And I think that was the stepping stone for my life, in the sense that at 6 I was playing with 10-year-olds and against 10-year-olds who are much stronger and faster, bigger. And so I had to use my hockey sense and my hockey knowledge, and obviously as you grow in age, becomes even better and more aware. So when I was 14 and they said, you can come and play on this junior team, and I went and watched a practice, and I was really unsure, to be honest. I didn't know if I could sustain and play against 18, 19, 20-year-olds. The coach actually talked me into it and said, you could play at this level and I want you to be part of this. And so a lot like when I was 6 playing against the 10-year-olds, I had to use my hockey knowledge and my hockey sense because, again, I wasn't as physically strong. I wasn't as big or fast. A junior B coach that I had at that time was the guy who really changed my career, in a sense that he was the guy that told me to watch Bobby Clarke play. And in those days, the centermen were guys like Phil Esposito and John Beliveau, and they were sort of this big, rugged, strong centerman that could consequently stand in the middle of the ice and stand in front of the goalie and not get pushed around. And when you're my size, at junior B, I think I was 5'7" and 115 pounds. I was a little guy. And it was him that encouraged me to watch Bobby Clarke, because Bobby Clarke wasn't known to be a big guy at the time, playing in the NHL and winning MVPs and Stanley Cups and scoring titles. So that's when I changed my whole game and started playing out of the corner and playing behind the net, which was relatively new for anybody to defend against, because nobody really ever gone behind the net. Everything used to be in front of the net. I sort of worked on that for 2 years as junior, and then I went and played Major Junior A in Sault Ste. Marie and continued on playing from sort of the corner and behind the net and sort of perfected it. By the time I got to Edmonton and the WHA, it was something that I was very comfortable with, and yet for people defending me, nobody had really seen that a whole lot, because everything used to transpire from the blue line to the front of the net. So I was able to grow my game, use my hockey sense, and practice what made me the player I became by starting doing it at the age of 14, and that was something that really helped me throughout my entire career.
And I want to back up momentarily. You, I think, humbly mentioned when you were 6, you only scored 1 goal, but failed to mention, fast forward, 4 years when you're playing against the same guys. Now, as a 10-year-old playing against 10-year-olds, you scored, something like 378 goals, so it picked up quickly. Tell about Wally Coliseum and why you used to pretend that was Maple Leafs Garden.
Well, listen, when you grow up in Southern Ontario, it's really sort of ingrained into us that we're all Maple Leaf fans, and we watch Hockey Night in Canada, and every Saturday night the Maple Leafs were on. And in those days, it used to come on at 8 o'clock, which is relatively late. And I was a huge Gordie Howe fan, and so if the Detroit Red Wings were in town and they were playing, my dad would let me watch the entire game. But if it was anybody else, I could only watch the first 2 periods and then have to go to bed. But, as kids, we all dreamed of one day playing in Maple Leaf Gardens. It was like our sort of church. It was our everything if you were a hockey player. My first game I ever went to, 1968 or 69, I was with my grandmother, and we sat in the very last row of Maple Leaf Gardens, and we got there at 7 o'clock and watched the warm-up. I watched the game. I watched the 3 stars, and I just kept thinking how great it was and how wonderful it was. And yet we sat in the very last row, but I still loved every second of it and can remember it like it was yesterday. And so that really, those kind of things really inspired me to one day dream big of wanting to play in the NHL. And so my whole belief was that I had a love and a passion. I mean, I truly enjoyed just skating by myself in the backyard for hours on hours. And I never looked at it like I was practicing or I was becoming a better player. I looked at it that was my thrill, and that was my fun, that I really truly could just skate out there by myself for hours on hours, and for whatever reason, nobody could understand it, but that was my fun.
And your dad had a unique way of making the hockey rink in the
Well,
backyard,
like
right?
everybody else, when I first started skating, we went to local parks that were frozen ice outside, and my grandmother had a river that ran through the back of her farm, and periodically I would skate on that when I was younger. And my dad always says that a necessity. It wasn't because he wanted to make me an NHL player, but the fact that I could be out there for hours and hours, and he would be freezing, that he could watch me skate for hours and hours from the kitchen and be warm inside, and that's how he originally decided to build a rink in the backyard. And he always built one of the best outdoor rinks around. He always had the ice 4.5, 5 inches thick, and he would begin by just watering it like everybody else, but he would take a sprinkler head at nights, and he'd have the sprinkler head going for a couple hours, and consequently he always had the best ice around.
Explain what you would do when watching a game on television as a kid with drawing the rink on a piece of paper and how that benefited you.
Well, my dad was always a really strong thinker of the game. I remember when I was 4 and 5 and 6, he used to have me do these stick handling drills and in and out of pylons and all that kind of stuff. But he had me doing it for hours on hours with tennis balls. And his theory was that the tennis ball would bounce a little bit more than the puck. So if you could control a tennis ball, you're going to be so much more comfortable and be so much more at ease stick handling and carrying a puck. So for hours and hours, I would skate and do drills with tennis balls at a young age. And then watching the games, he used to say to me, look, what you should do is take out a big diagram and build the rink, and you should watch the game. And by watching the game and not looking down, you're going to create some more peripheral vision, and you're going to grow your sense of where the puck is on the ice at all times. And so I would sit there every game basically when I was a youngster and follow the puck without looking down onto the sheet. And as time went on, obviously I got better and better at it. Probably was drawn on the floor half the time at the beginning, but as time went on, I sort of mastered it pretty well.
How would you best explain the role your dad played in your life?
Well, it was everything. My mom and dad they're the reason that I made the NHL. Fathers get most credit for athletes, and deservingly so, they get a lot of the credit, but my mother was probably as important, or maybe even more important, in the sense that she was the foundation of our family and of our household. But my dad always said, the good Lord has blessed you for whatever reason. You're getting a great opportunity to get out and see the world and create some great memories and some great thrills in your lifetime, and I'd hate to see you sort of throw it away. And I remember the biggest lesson, or one of the biggest lessons I ever learned, was the year I scored the 400 goals. I was a kid that as soon as hockey season was over, I couldn't wait for baseball and box lacrosse, and basically I took my equipment and I threw it downstairs at the end of middle of April, and didn't get it back up there until Labor Day. I never skated in the off season, never went to hockey schools. I didn't do any of that. I guess they probably call it cross training now, but back in those days, it was just like, all right, I'm going to do track now, I'm going to do baseball.
And your dream was being a Detroit Tigers player anyway.
Yeah, right? I loved baseball as much or more than I even enjoyed the game of hockey. So it was about 3 or 4 days after our season had ended, and one of the towns, which was a half hour from our town that we never really played against for whatever reason, they wanted to play an exhibition game. And so the coach came over and he said, we'll play this game as long as Wayne's going to play. If Wayne doesn't play, we're not going to do the game. And so my dad said, do you want to play? And I said, yeah, okay, I'll play. So we went down. It was like a Sunday afternoon, and got in the arena, and it wasn't a big arena, but it was jam-packed, probably 1,000 to 1,100 people that were jammed into this little old minor hockey rink. And we got beat 8-1. It wasn't a very good game by any means, and I remember we got in the car and my dad said, what do you think? And I said, well, what are you going to do? Last game we lost 8-1. It's not a real big deal. And, in a nice way, my dad said to me, you can't be like that. And I remember thinking, what do you mean? He said, you ruined your whole year. I said, how could I ruin my whole year? And he said, for whatever reason, the good Lord has chosen you. And each and every time you play, people want to see what the fuss and what everything is all about. And you can't afford not to be ready to play the best you can play each and every night. And so it was a lesson I learned because as I went on and started playing with the Oilers, we'd go to exhibition games in places like San Antonio and those days Miami and Dallas and places they didn't have National Hockey League teams. And we would fill those buildings and people would come in from everywhere to see us play. And so it was a great lesson for me because when I got into those games, I understood what people wanted to see. And so I prepared for each and every game like it was a Stanley Cup final game, whether it was an exhibition game in the end of September or Game 7 of the Stanley Cup playoffs in May. I know in my heart that I physically and mentally did the best I could to play as good as I could play that night. Now, listen, I had a lot of bad games, but I know in my heart that I prepared for each and every game all the way back because of that lesson that my dad taught me when I was 10.
I think it was when you were with the Oilers, if there was an important game coming up, sometimes they would call your dad to try and get him to come to the game because they believed you just played even a little better when your father was in attendance.
It was always a catch-22 because when I would come out for the morning skate, if I saw my dad, obviously I was thrilled he was there, and I did always play a lot better when my dad was in the building, but it was also a sign of, okay, geez, they don't think I'm playing well enough right now. I better get going. So it was kind of a catch-22. It was a little bit of a kick in the butt also.
So in 1991, later on, your father suffers a near-fatal brain aneurysm. How did you find out?
We were actually playing that night, and as my routine was, it was, I ate lunch around 12:15, and I generally lied down for an hour and a half. Sometimes I slept, sometimes I didn't. And generally I got up around 3 o'clock and got dressed and went to the arena. What had transpired at that moment was around 1 o'clock I could hear my wife running up the stairs and, kind of flew open the door. And, for people who are around the athletes, they understand that there's sort of an hour and a half period there. Everybody's quiet and nobody wakes anybody up because they're getting ready. But it was obviously pretty quick and loud and running through. And she said, your dad's in the hospital. And so we got on a plane that day, and I missed the game that night, and we flew home. And it's an amazing story because, my dad worried about everything that transpired in his entire family, his friends. And part of, any kind of injury like that is a lot to do with stress. And for my dad, he was, I think, 7 days basically in a coma and 2 or 3 years in a clinic, maybe even 4 years in a clinic. And then the last year, when they released him, he was at home, and we used to have signs in the house for him to remember where the washroom was and where the kitchen was. And it's an amazing story because if you saw my dad today, you wouldn't even know he had an injury. And, it's probably added 20, 25 years to his life because as the case for a lot of people in the 50s and early 60s, a lot of people smoked and it was part of our society. And, he smoked probably a pack of cigarettes a day. Since his brain aneurysm, obviously he hasn't had a cigarette and he hasn't smoked. And because of that, he's probably lived 20, 25 years longer. So in life, everything happens for a reason. He's one of the most renowned Canadians in Canadian history because, he's good to everybody. And people in Canada understand and realize that he's just got a big heart. And for my dad, his riches are his family and friends. And money's never been a big issue with my dad.
Well, it was amazing, too. I was talking to him the other day, and we talked for about an hour, and probably a dozen times during the course of an hour, people came to the house, asking to see trophies or for autographs or stuff like that. So the conversation was, interrupted a bunch, but I just thought it was amazing how accommodating he was. But then, too, when speaking about what transpired there, he's like, really, I mean, it turned out great because my therapist is now my son-in-law. So
Yeah.
even something that was so tough, he put a positive spin on. But it was also interesting. He was saying when he first came out of the operation, he was speaking Ukrainian,
Yeah.
the first language he learned, didn't know how to tie his shoes or open a door, didn't recognize you or any of your siblings. What did that recovery process entail for him?
Well, listen, I think it was a lot tougher for my mom, obviously. It was tougher for my sister and my brothers because they were actually there in that area full time. For me, I still had to get on and play and fulfill my responsibility of being an NHL hockey player. So I didn't have the day-to-day interactions or frustrations that they had to go through. But I was a good sort of person for them in a sense that I could see the changes in him because I could maybe wouldn't see him for a month or 3 months or 4 months, and I could see the changes, whereas when they were with him every day, they didn't see the gradual changes. But it was tough for my mom. It was really hard for my mom. She they got married when she was 18, and my dad, like most people, that was her life, and so it was really difficult for my mom. But once he got through that sort of 4-year period, and then they started to wean him off of the drugs that he had to take to prevent further, heart attacks or aneurysms. Once he sort of started coming off of that medication, you could see the energy level and his personality start to come back. Now, ironically, with a brain aneurysm, things change in life, and for him, he changed in a sense that his beliefs in life and him as a person didn't change, but his passions and his hobbies that he loved to do completely changed. My
Really?
dad, completely. My dad never played golf. When he came back, he started picking up and playing a little bit of golf. My dad never went anywhere without a camera in his hand. We used to go to all-star games, and in those days they'd have a sort of an event Monday night, and the game was Tuesday. And Tuesday morning they'd do a team picture, and Monday night everybody was a black tie event. And the players were really genuinely excited to see my dad with his camera because he was the one person that the next year he'd give them the pictures that he had taken the year before. He was very thorough about it, and it was a big passion of his. And he loved to fish. My dad was a huge fisherman, and it was one of those things where, when you're a kid, your dad wants to fish with you. But by the time I was about 13, I finally looked at my dad and I said, I hate fishing. I'm never going to do it again. So when he came out of his coma, he never really picked up fishing again. He never picked up his camera again. But the good things, like I said, he quit smoking, and I think he's more at ease. He doesn't worry so much about the wins and losses when I was playing or when I was coaching or part of a team. He enjoys it when we win, but he doesn't stress like he used to stress over it. That, there was games where he would basically leave the arena and kind of go outside because he couldn't watch sometimes because it was so stressful for him.
Was it hard how much of the memory that was lost, considering all the
Was it hard for
hockey?
us?
Right. I mean, for you specifically.
Not really, because we were just thrilled that he was still around.
Okay.
We were fortunate. We felt like we were lucky that he was still with us, although his likes and passions and hobbies had changed. He really hadn't changed as a person, but his likes and dislikes had changed a little bit.
He was telling me for a while when you were growing up, I think he was making like $40 a week, and occasionally he'd go to the market where his mother, your grandma, worked to ask for $10 to be able to afford to buy you a $5, $6 stick and then have a few extra dollars to support the family.
Right.
How much do you think your parents sacrificed to support
Yeah,
hockey?
everything. As you said, I was sort of community helped in the sense that both grandparents, my mom's side and my dad's side, helped out. If my dad couldn't afford a new pair of skates for me, one of my grandparents inevitably helped out. Every now and then an uncle or cousin would help out. We didn't go on family vacations because we really couldn't afford it. Our family vacations were going to hockey games and baseball games, but we didn't want for anything else. That was our life, and we loved every minute of it. But yeah, you know, we're no different than 1,000 other stories of kids in North America or even Europe that came over that made the NHL that didn't have as much as other kids, but we were rich in support and love, and to me that meant more than financial dollars.
So a year earlier, I think you're getting paid $5 an hour filling potholes with gravel, and then all of a sudden you sign a multi-year contract where you get a $250,000 signing bonus plus another $100,000 in the first year. What does your dad say to you when you ask for some money from that to buy a car?
Yeah. You know, it's an interesting, because when I was a kid, you know, 12 and 13 and 14, and I understood that we didn't have a whole lot, but that was okay. I didn't want for anything, but I can remember at sort of 12, 13, 14 saying, should I get a summer job? And my dad always said, no, you know, you got your whole life to work. When you're a kid, be a kid. But if you're going to be a kid and train and be the best athlete you can be, that's your responsibility, and make sure you don't fake it. Make sure you put in the time. And so I always thought that. And then when I turned 16, I remember he said, okay, you can work this summer. I remember I got a job. I think I was making about $4 an hour. But I really enjoyed it. I was throwing gravel onto holes on the roads and highways, and somebody else would tar it. And I remember thinking, well, why can't I tar it? Why do I throw the gravel? But I worked for about 8 weeks, and I remember when my last day, I remember my dad saying to me, I guess you want to become a professional hockey player. I said, yeah, I guess I do. But it was a great learning experience for me. I'm glad I did it, and you know, obviously it encouraged me to become the best athlete I could become. Yeah, and like everyone else, I was in shock, and I didn't see that coming when Nelson Scalabrini and WHA came along and offered me this ransom of money, and I didn't anticipate it. So when I did sign, I remember I said, I got to buy a car. I had just gotten my license because my dad wouldn't let me get my driver's license till I was 17. So I'd just gotten it in about February or March of that year. And I remember saying to my dad, I need to buy a car. And he said, all right, here's $5,000, get whatever you can. So I bought an old used Trans Am, and I was the happiest kid in the world.
And you didn't ask, you didn't
No.
need the more money?
I think I paid $3,600 for it, but I was more happy than anybody.
I want to run through some notable moments and just get you to recall what went on. How about 1981 Canada Cup lunch with the Canadian Prime Minister?
Yeah, you know, the Canada Cup in '81 was so unique because I was a baby. I was 19 years old, and I was playing with guys like Larry Robinson and Dennis Potvin and Guy Lafleur. My goodness, the list goes on. And here was this kid who had been watching them on TV 2 or 3 years earlier, watching them play in the NHL and watching them play for Canada, thinking, wow, what am I doing here? And you know, it was a long tournament. In those days, it was a long event. We would start training camp early July, maybe July 4th or 5th, and do almost a 4-week training camp, which was 2 hours of skating in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and then bike ride after that. And we did that every day for probably 21, 22 days. And then 3 or 4 pre-tournament games, and then an entire tournament, and then a final. So it was a long sort of summer for us to be prepared for hockey. Being only 19 years old, that's really what all I had in my life was hockey. But you know, there's other players that had families and kids, and unfortunately, when we lost, you know, we'd been there a long time. A lot of the guys wanted to leave and get out of there. They wanted to go home, which is perfectly natural. So there's only 2 or 3 of us that ended up, because we thought we were going to be the champions and have this trophy. We were going to have a luncheon with the Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada, and there's only 3 or 4 of us that ended up staying in town. I remember thinking, geez, should I stay for this? And my dad said, you're not going anywhere. You're going to that lunch. I said, okay. Which I'm very happy that I went to. We ended up having a wonderful time. It was only 3 or 4 of us with the Prime Minister, and we got some great one-on-one time with him.
How about getting thrown in jail with only a jock and a hockey sock on your head?
No, that's a little bit of a myth.
What is it?
Yeah.
It wasn't in your autobiography.
Yeah, but the story gets bigger and bigger.
Okay.
No, so when I was playing junior hockey,
They pulled a prank on you. Right?
yeah,
Okay.
and you know, we were in like overcoats and running shoes and shorts and T-shirts, and we were put into this van, and we were taken to a high school football game, and we were told we were going to be running across the field, and you know, it was all a threat. Nothing ever transpired of it, and then they had these police guys that they had on site show up, and they were going to arrest us, and we never really did get down to a police station, but trust me, they did enough to scare the crap out of me without having us to go anywhere.
When you were, I think, 18 years old, you were asked to sign a 20-year contract.
Right.
20 years. What did you start to do when you were getting ready to sign the contract? How'd you kind of chicken out?
I was really lucky. When I turned pro, I had a group of older players that really, obviously when we were at the arena, they treated me like a teammate. But away from the arena, they treated me like a son. I played with a guy named Jimmy Nielsen, and I was doing some high school classes, and I used to pick his daughter up to take her to school because we had some classes together. So one of my teammates and his child, we were in some same classes. So I got very close to them, and I had a real big belief in them and respect for them, not only as players but as people. When I was offered the contract, you know, you got to remember I came from, you know, a blue-collar family, and when you get offered that kind of money, you're sort of like, I was always the guy that said, you know what, security is a big thing. Although it's not going to change me, I'm going to work even that much harder. But some of the older players that I was playing with thought that I was going to be underpaid, and felt that, you know what, in 3 years you're probably going to be upset that you signed this deal. And you know, I sat down and talked to my dad. My dad was a really big advocate of it also. He felt that this was a great win-win for not only the team but for me personally, and so ultimately I ended up signing it. But before I was going to sign it, a couple of the players said to me, you know, put a different name on there. Don't sign your name, and then afterwards you can work it all out. And I just felt like, you know what, I'd sort of given my word that I wanted to do the deal. And when I did the deal, and I'm glad I did it, in those days things were different. I knew that if I played well, I knew that if I went to another level that, you know, we could have contract talks and that could change, and ultimately that's what happened.
The 1987 Canada Cup, you went off apparently on Mario Lemieux in practice one day. Explain the situation and why you did it.
Well, that's not necessarily true. Players who know me and know that I've played with them, I don't think I've ever gone off on anybody, except when Marty stole my Diet Cokes here and there. You know, Mario was a young kid, and as I was in 1981, you know, you're in awe, and I was in awe, and so probably was Mario in '87. We didn't play together the first 4 or 5 games, and we were really bad. Not really bad, but we weren't what we were supposed to be. It was supposed to be this big buildup. It was going to be Canada against Russia in the finals, or at that time the Soviet Union. And we had stumbled along for 2.5, 3 weeks in this tournament. We had a big powwow, myself and Mark Messier and Ray Bourque, with, at that time, I think the GMs were Bobby Clark and Serge Savard and Cliff Fletcher. Talked about what we can do to make it more comfortable and make things better. And so we were able to do that. And at the arena the next day, Mike had called us in and said, you know, I'm going to play you and Mario together. And I said, that's fine. And so what had happened was the first game we played together, him and I got a 2-on-1. And I gave him a pass. And Mario's got such great hands, like Mike Bossy or Brett Hall. He never misses. And he passed it back to me. Now, although I was a goal scorer and scored a lot of goals, quite frankly, I would tell you that, Mario's got an opportunity to snap a puck from the slot. His shot is probably harder and better than mine. And consequently, I wanted him to be the shooter. So when we got back to the bench, I said, listen, Mario, if we ever get 2-on-1s, just believe me, you're going to be the shooter. You're going to score the goal because, quite frankly, you're a better goal scorer than I am. And so that was the conversation I really had with him. And what made that such a big story was ultimately how we won the final game when we had a 2-on-1 and I gave him the pass. And I knew when I gave him the pass, I was never going to get it back. And I remember saying to him when he scored the goal, I said, oh my gosh, that was one of the greatest goals I was ever part of.
And Coach Mike Keenan credits that as the tournament where Mario really became the player that he ultimately.
He would have been the player he became. Obviously, like me in '81, when you're around guys like Guy Lafleur and Robinson and guys like that, you become a better player. And you watch how they practice and you watch how they became winners. And sometimes you got to see it firsthand in order to really comprehend it. Pure talent and ability just doesn't do that. You got to gain this knowledge. And so I got it in '81, and Mark Messier got big parts of it also, and guys like that. And then Mario was the benefactor of that in '87 and became, helped make him or help become the player he became. But listen, Mario Lemieux was still one of the greatest players who ever lived. I think he would have been fine had he not been there in '87.
Speaking of that knowledge, though, walking past the Islanders' locker room after the team beats you to win the Stanley Cup Finals, what did you take away from that?
Well, it was really difficult because first and foremost, in that year, we had such a great playoff, and we were flying on all cylinders. I mean, we were a really good team. What we lacked, though, was knowledge and experience. And in '84, I guess it was '83, we played the very first game. We had home ice advantage. We played the first game in Edmonton, and I don't know the exact number or the correct number, but I believe the shots were something like 53-18. Billy Smith was sensational, stood on his head, and we lost 2-0. And we weren't experienced enough or smart enough to rebound or regroup from that 2-0 loss. Their experience and their patience was really evident, not so much in game one, but more so in game two, because in game two, we lost, I believe, 6-3, if my memory is correct. And what made the game so unique was that Mike Bossy got food poisoning that day, and Mike Bossy didn't dress that night. And the three guys on that team, other than Billy Smith, that were so imperative to the group were obviously Mike Bossy, Brian Trottier, and Dennis Potvin. So by taking Mike Bossy out of the lineup, we felt, okay, this is our opportunity to jump back into the series. What transpired in the game was something that I can remember like yesterday. They just thoroughly dominated us. They played their best game up until that point in the series. They threw a guy into the lineup who wasn't even dressed in game one, a kid named, I think his name was Anders Kalur, and he scored 3 goals that night, and we got beat 6-3. And before we knew it, we were down 2-0, and Mike Bossy hadn't even played in both games. That set us on our ear. It taught us a lot. It showed us a lot. And so when we went to the island, obviously we lost game 3. And then, game 4, we still had, obviously, belief in our group, because at that point in time, all the pressure was off of us. And I remember losing game 4, and in the island, the way the arena works is that you got to walk by their locker room from your locker room to get onto the bus. And I remember saying to Kevin Lowe, oh my God, this is going to be the worst walk of my life. And what we saw and what we witnessed was completely different than what we sort of had thought in our minds was going to happen. And obviously there was jubilation in their locker room. Obviously there was excitement, and they were a great franchise, and I think that was their 4th cup. But it really wasn't the players themselves that were overly celebrating. The players themselves were pretty banged up and pretty quiet, to say the least, because that's where we learned the difference between winning and losing, that winning is hard and it's tough and it's physically and mentally demanding, and losing is relatively simpler and it's quite frankly easier. And so it was a great lesson for our franchise. And, from there, it becomes leadership. And we had a really good coach in Glenn Sather. When we got back to Edmonton and in our exit meetings, he talked about what we had to change and yet how proud he was of our team. But we weren't going to be in a panic situation, that we were going to learn from this and become a better team from it. And I think everybody took that to heart. And obviously his leadership was a big part of what mentally the players started focusing on right from the time we left the arena in June till when we got back in September.
When you scored 5 goals in a game, bringing your total to 50 goals in 39 games, what did you say to your dad when you called him immediately after getting off the ice?
Well, in those days, things were different. You never knew if because all the games weren't on TV. You don't know if they got it on the satellite dish or if they were able to see it. So immediately after the game, I wanted to call, and obviously I knew he probably heard. Even if he wasn't watching the game, he had friends obviously in Edmonton. They were probably calling him after the second period and updating him. And I just said, hey, it was a big night. It was a good night. And
he gave a much more animated version than I was talking to.
Yeah, he was like, what took you so long?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So but I remember driving to the arena that night, and I'd had, obviously it had been a great year for our team, and obviously I was at a pretty good pace when I was driving the arena, 45 goals in 38 games. And Kevin Lowe and I used to drive the rink together all the time, and I was very edgy and very nervous. And I remember I said to Kevin, I said, oh my God, I said, I can't get this close and not get 50 goals in 50 games. Now, I wasn't thinking 39, I wasn't thinking 40, I was thinking I got to get 50 and 50. And I remember saying to Kevin, I got 12 games to get 5 goals. I can't be the guy known, because Rocket Richard and Bossy had done it, I can't be known as the guy that got almost there and then choked. So I was so nervous going to that game. And Philadelphia at the time was a really tough team to play against. They were really disciplined defensively, and there was a difference between the East and the West. The West was a little bit more wide open, and the Eastern teams were obviously a little more defensive-minded. And Pete Peters was a very good goalie, and Pat Quinn was a really good coach. And it was always hard for me to play against Bobby Clark, but I always got excited to play against him. And it was just when I scored the first goal from the puck went off boards from behind the net, I remember I said to Paul Coffey, I said, okay, I got a good feeling about tonight. Things are going to be lucky.
And I don't know if you would expect this. Your dad got choked up when he was telling me the story, because he said you told him you were calling before speaking to the press, and he said it just goes to show you how Wayne always put family first.
Well, listen, he was a big believer that the media and the press were a big part of the game of hockey, sports in general. And so for him to say, it was nice you called me before you talked to the media, was probably a big deal for me, because normally he'd say, get out there and talk to everybody.
Yeah, right. So after you won your 4th Stanley Cup in 5 years, what's the shocking news your dad ends up telling you that night?
Well, listen, obviously it was a huge year for us, because we'd come off September winning the Canada Cup, when that was so exciting. The hockey was parallel to that of the 72 Summit Series. And, there'll never be a replica of 1972, but as close as we could ever get to that sort of enthusiasm and style of play was that of 87. So it was an exciting year. We got off to a great start. It was fun. I got hurt. It was just an accidental freak play. I hurt my knee, and I missed 6 weeks. First time I really had missed a length amount of time in a season. But as it turned out, because I'd played so much hockey from the 81 Canada Cup, the 84, the 87 Canada Cup, we got to the Stanley Cup final. 5 out of 6 years, I played so much hockey. And in those days, we played 14 exhibition games. So I'd played a ton of hockey, and so it was probably the best thing that could happen to me, was that I got a little bit of a break, and I ended up with about a 5.5, 6 week break. And when I came back, I felt fresher, and I felt stronger, and I felt better. Obviously, we were the best team that year, and we basically won 4 straight in the final, and we had a really strong, solid group of guys. Fortunate enough to play with so many Hall of Famers and so many great unselfish players, and it was exciting. And to win the 4th time, it never gets monotonous, although we were saying, well, this is something we could get used to. And it was obviously very exciting. And I remember by the 4th time you win the Stanley Cup, everything sort of changes. And I don't mean this to be egotistical, but you win the first Stanley Cup, everybody sort of is helter-skelter. Nobody really knows what's going on or where do you go or who takes the cup.
Right.
By the 4th Cup, everything's sort of more mellow and much more organized, and players are a little bit more subdued, although obviously really excited. And so we had, I think we had like a big family, friends, team sort of get-together dinner. And it was at that point in time my dad sort of whispered in my ear that there had been talk that, teams were maybe going to trade for me. And I thought he was out of his mind, and I didn't believe that was realistic. And so that was the end of it. And, as the night went on, we went home, and I got a phone call at home. In those days, people had phones in their houses. I had a phone call from the first contract that I was ever offered by Nelson Skalbania, and he asked me how I'd like to become a Vancouver Canuck and be part owner, and I said, I don't even know what you're talking about. So once he made that call, I knew there's some sort of traction to the story, and I knew there was something behind it.
What do you remember from being in the office of the then Kings owner when the Oilers owner calls and doesn't know you're in the office?
Well, listen, I knew by that point in time I was going to get traded, and business is business, and even for me at that time, I didn't understand it completely. I felt that, obviously the biggest reason I got traded is I wouldn't sign an extension, and it wasn't that I wouldn't sign. It was more on the basis of, look, let me play the year out, and at the end of the year, whatever fair market value is, I don't want to go anywhere, quite frankly. And from his side of things, he didn't want that to happen. He said, basically, if you don't sign, I got to move you. At that point in time, obviously, I didn't understand it, partly because I was younger and, quite frankly, didn't understand that side of the business. But in saying all that, the biggest myth of all was the fact that, my family and my wife wanted me to be traded to LA. That was so not true. We narrowed it down to about 4 teams because the team wasn't going to make a deal unless I would sign an extension, obviously. They weren't going to give up a lot and a lot of money if I wasn't going to sign. And so as we talked about it, we narrowed it down to, I think there was 3 or 4 teams involved. And my wife had sort of suggested Detroit, and she felt that that was the right place for me to go, and that's the right place for me to play. It was my dad who stepped in and said, there's only one Gordie Howe. The Red Wings are fine. That franchise is everything they're going to be, and they're going to be successful. Why don't you try something unique and different and go to LA? And at that point in time, Bruce had been so good to me and so excited about getting me that I felt like, all right, this will be a great challenge. Now, let me tell you, the first exhibition game I played, when I looked in the stands and there was about 9,000 people in the arena, for a Saturday night exhibition game, I'm thinking, what have I done and what have I got myself into? Because I'd come from arguably one of the greatest teams ever and arguably one of the most exciting franchises that ever put together a team. A lot of Hall of Famers and a really exciting team, to a team that finished 20th out of 21 teams. That was a big drop. So I knew we had a tremendous amount of work ahead of us, but I was thrilled with the opportunity, and quite frankly, I was scared to death.
But when you were in the office that day, you're with the Kings owner, the Oilers owner calls, not knowing you're there. Well, what did you hear? And at the time, how did that make you feel?
No, he basically said I was like every other player, and he was going to trade me because I wasn't going to sign a contract with him. And that sort of probably elevated my level of, okay, we got to move on here, and I'm gonna get traded. At that point in time, like every athlete, you think that you're untouchable in a franchise, but he looked at me as one of 20 players, and I understood that now. At that time, I didn't understand it at all.
Were you, and I mean, it seemed like you kind of went out of your way to be overly nice with how you handled things in that press conference where the trade was?
Well, because I was treated incredibly well, not only by the organization and not only by ownership and the coaches. I mean, they were hard on me. The coaches got to be hard on you. That's what makes you a better athlete. There were some times I wasn't too happy about that, but that's what made me the player I became. But all in all, the memories and the friendships I had and the people I met in Edmonton, the fans I've met, it was hard. It was difficult for when they told me, okay, and we're going to trade him. We basically, he's out of here, and that was difficult for me. It was Glenn Saylor was the one guy though that tried to talk me out of it, and he was the one guy that said I can stop this and I can kill this. Basically stepped in and said all that, but by that point in time, I felt like that ship had sailed.
After you were traded, I think the Oilers owner suggested publicly that your tears in the press conference were fake.
Well, again,
did it bother you?
Oh,
like
sure.
how
It
it
crushed me.
all ended?
Yeah, it crushed me, and probably I said some things about him or to him that crushed him, because the emotions were really high. But you know, he went through a hard, difficult time when he traded me, and he probably knew more than anybody how hard it was going to be. So he's defending himself and his integrity. Now I look back at it, I understand it. I understand where he's coming from. At the time, I didn't have a whole lot of sympathy for it, but at this point in time in my life, you know, I understand the entire package.
To what extent were you surprised by how severe the public reaction
I wasn't
was?
surprised because, you know, Edmontonians treated me like a son. I always say that, you know, Mark Messier is an Edmonton boy and he's their son, and I was from Toronto area and I was their adopted son. I made so many friendships, and I like to think we gave them a lot of great memories. One of the things that is kind of funny now when I go to Edmonton periodically, people will say, you know, my grandparents told me you were a pretty good player. They used to watch you play, and I think, oh my God, how old am I getting? Used to be, you know, I saw you play, or my kids saw you play. Now it's, my grandparents said you were pretty good. So I got treated so well there. Never had a problem or an issue. Nobody treated me any different than anyone else in that city. People would say to me all the time, how did you get around? Where did you go? I went everywhere. Nobody ever bothered me. Sure, people wanted autographs or the odd picture, but nobody ever bugged me to a point where I'd say, I can't go there, there's too many people. I went to theaters, I went to movies, I went to junior hockey games and sat in the stands. People treated me just incredibly well, and that was the hardest part about leaving, is I was treated so well.
And you received an amazing standing ovation the first time you came back to play the Oilers in Edmonton. What you said the hardest thing you ever had to do in hockey was play the Oilers?
Yeah. Listen, the first game I went back was so difficult. Because first and foremost, the guys on the other team, we'd won championships together. We were best friends together. We saw families grow together. Our parents were all best friends, whether it was Mr. and Mrs. Messier or my mom and dad or the Coffees. You know, Sather was a big believer in the families being together. After games, parents would ride on the team bus back to the hotel. It wasn't one of these, oh, it's just the players can be on the team bus. He really incorporated the family, and so that part was hard for me. Secondly, Edmonton's different than most cities, and that's not a big, huge city. So 90% of the games, it was the same people sitting in the same seats. I could look across the ice, and for 4 people sitting there, I saw those same 4 people almost 35 out of 40 games. So they became like friends, not just fans. They became friends. So going in there, and they treated me well, and I like to think I played hard for them, so it was a two-way street. So going in there, I knew it was going to be the hardest thing I ever did. And so the first game was relatively not easy, but it was nice because there was a lot of niceties that went with that first time back. After that, for me, it was the hardest place I ever played in. I hated it, never liked it, never got over it. From the first game to the last shift I played there, I just was never very comfortable at ever being an opponent playing in Edmonton.
Your family and your wedding, how true is it that, something like 10,000 people were outside the chapel in which
Well, first
you
of
got
all,
married?
you got to understand, it's a huge hockey city. It's a huge sports city. So the people that we had at the wedding, the people who were going to be there, obviously a lot of the Oiler players, some NHL guys, people like Gordie Howe and Vladislav Tretiak, people who are my friends over the years. And Edmontonians love hockey and they want to see them. And so part of the attraction was for people to see these different athletes and celebrities that might be at the wedding. And then, of course, the wedding itself. So, again, nobody bothered me. Nobody got in the way. People were genuinely nice. People were very appreciative. And it was one of those, it was a beautiful day for not only myself, but for my grandmothers who were both there. And obviously my mom and dad and Janet's mom. It was.
It looked like a royal wedding.
No, it wasn't quite like
But
that.
I mean, that's what it.
But it was fun.
Right.
I'd done so many favors in town for different charity events and stuff like that. So, people that I had done favors for in the years sort of stepped up. And like the Edmonton Orchestra said, we want to play in the church. And a couple of my friends said, we want to sing. And the people who donated a couple old cars to take the wedding party away were people I'd done charity events for in town and donated their cars. So it became like a city event in that everybody was sort of involved because it is a small community and everybody helps each other. Turned out to be a wonderful day.
Although I don't think she remembers it, you and your now wife Janet first met, I think, in 1981 at Dance Fever, and then you guys later had a chance to talk at a Lakers-Celtics game, during which you asked her, I think, to grab like beers after the game. Is it true, like that night, you knew you were in love with her?
Well, I don't know if that night, but yeah, we got along very well the very first time we sort of sat and actually chatted with each other, and our, mindset was very similar, and our goals were the same in life, in that, family was number one importance, and our careers were important, but, we both wanted to have kids and a family. So when you start off a night where you're both on the same page, obviously it makes life that much more simple. But it was true. We met in '81. I did this show called Dance Fever, and obviously she's a tremendous dancer, and she was really good at it, and I was a horrible dancer. And it's probably one of the most feared moments I had in my life. Is you had to walk out on stage and dance for like 8 seconds, and it was. She one time asked me what happens to my rhythm when I take my skates off, and I said I really don't know. But
so how'd you do?
I did awful, but and then you were to judge these kids who were dancing. And of course, I was going to give every one of them a 10, no matter what, because I don't know anything about dancing. So I did. I think I gave everybody a 10. But that's when we first met, and then over the years, I think we ran into each other a couple of times at different charity events, and then. We went to the Lakers-Celtic game. We were both big basketball fans in the sense that we loved watching the Celtic-Laker final like everyone else, and we just happened to be at the same game. She was with a friend, and I was with Alan Thicke, and we ended up going for a bite to eat after, and the rest is history.
What's this I hear that you proposed over the phone?
Yeah, sort of Jackie Robinson. I saw that in this movie. We were in Edmonton together, and she was going to do this video for a workout video, and she was going to be gone for 5 or 6 weeks. And it was just one of those things where when you're chatting on the phone, basically it was like, well, why don't we get married? And so we just said, yeah, why wait? And we did it over the phone, obviously. And when she came back to Edmonton, obviously we had a proper dinner and proper event to get ready. But it was interesting. I had really not told anybody, and I told one of my teammates one night, and one of the waiters, I guess, overheard it, and it was the next morning, it was on the news, and I said, oh my God, how did this get on the news? And you could call into the radio station for the biggest tip of the day or the biggest tip of the month, and this guy won. I said, I hope you win tip of the year. It's worth it. So anyway, that's kind of how it leaked out. We didn't plan on it leaking out till she got back, but it happened.
Your daughter's soon-to-be husband's PGA Tour star, Dustin Johnson. What's it like having another professional athlete in the family?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we're really lucky. We're very proud of all of our kids, and proud in the sense that the greatest compliment you can have as a parent is when people say, your kids are so polite and they're so nice and they're so thoughtful. And that's the best compliment you can have as a parent about your children. And for us, we're lucky. We have 3 older kids, 2 younger ones who are still at home. And obviously the 2 older kids, Ty and Paulina. Paulina's engaged with Dustin, as you said, and Ty's got a wonderful girlfriend that's around a lot for the last couple of years. So we're lucky in that our kids who are branching out now are bringing people around us that are very, very nice. And for Dustin, obviously he's at a whole different level in his career right now. He's been a wonderful father, and he's been tremendous to have around our family, and we like to think we've helped him a little bit. But we never thought, or I never thought once I retired, that I'd have this same sense or this same feeling going into tournaments, that you're pulling so badly and wanting somebody to win so desperately that your stomach hurts when you're watching. And it's probably the same feeling that my wife and my dad had when they watched me play hockey games when we were in the championship games.
Really? That's, I mean, you feel the same way when watching?
Sometimes I have to turn away if he's got a putt, or sometimes, I get nervous if he's got a shot, but that's because you want someone to do so well. That's because you're pulling for them so badly that you get this anxiety inside you that you want them to be so successful. And listen, he's an elite athlete. He's an elite golfer, obviously. And he's got the ability to go to even another level, I believe, and good for him.
Much like anybody at points in their life, he went through some tough times in 2014, and he has publicly said you were one of the key people in his life then, and has been very complimentary of your role in all of that. What was important to you to pass along during that period?
Listen, in life, nobody's perfect, and everyone has, in there's some point in time in their life, come to that sort of fork in the road where you got to make a decision. Okay, is this what I really want to do, or am I happy sort of bumping along? And I think for Dustin, that's really what happened to him. He got to a point in his life where he said, you know what, I don't want to just be an average player. I want to be the best player I can become. And from my point of view and Janet's point of view, we just gave him sort of that support and that belief that every athlete needs. I don't care which athlete you are, even the greatest athletes in the world have to have that confidence. And if you don't have that confidence, then it doesn't matter how talented you are. And I think he really came to that realization on his own. And from what I saw and from what I know of him and being around him, and obviously I was around him a lot, I think really his life changed more so than being around Janet and I and Paulina. When he was disappointed he didn't make the President's Cup team, I believe in 2013, when he was 9th player and he didn't get picked. He wasn't a captain's pick. And I think that really shook him up to a point where, as Janet had said to him one night, don't put your fate in anybody else's hands, control your own destiny. And I think that's when he really made the decision as a professional athlete, I'm going to control my own destiny from now on. And from that point on, he just became a different probably person and a more complete golfer than he is today. And he's a special athlete. And more importantly, we love him to death. He's just a wonderful young man.
Which has to make the success he's now having all the sweeter.
It's so much fun because we personally saw the effort and the work and the commitment that he's put into it, and the time. There's a lot of great athletes in the world, and my dad always said, no matter how good you think you are, there's somebody out there that's better than you are. So you better be ready the best you can possibly be, or you're going to be on the receiving end of that loss. And I think for Dustin, everyone knew how good he was, and I think that the last person maybe to understand or realize to what level he could get to is maybe himself. And
why do you think that was?
Some people it just takes longer to learn. Every athlete's different. Some athletes learn it at 20, some athletes learn it at 25, some athletes learn it at 30. And I just think from his point of view, he just finally said, okay, I'm not going to be content winning once a year. I want to go out there and win a lot. And I think he's put in so much work now, not just from the golf, but physically getting ready to play golf. He's in better shape than he's ever been in. And as I told him in Pittsburgh this year, when he played so well and won the U.S. Open, physically that's about as good a shape as I've ever seen him in. And he's always been known to be in great shape as an athlete. And I think he's even gone to another level now.
What do you think the difference is between great and the best?
Oh, it's a fine line, but I think and I said this I say this a lot, the greatest athletes who ever played in any sport that they're in save their best for the most crucial and most pressure scenario. And I always relate to when I was a younger kid and a guy that was a fan of every sport and watched other athletes. And I always said this, that if it was Game 7 of a baseball game, you could not get George Brett out. George Brett was the greatest clutch hitter I ever saw as a baseball player. If it was Game 7 of NBA Finals, you wanted to see Larry Bird and Magic Johnson play because they both could dominate. I thought that John McEnroe, the bigger the game, the bigger the tennis match, the different level that he would go to. And more importantly, those players loved it. You could see by the look in their eyes and in their faces, it wasn't work to them. That's when they were having their most fun, and that's when they were having their most enjoyment. Was the bigger the game and the bigger the situation, the next level that they would rise to. And for me, that's what I've always admired, and that's why I've always said that guy's a good player, but that guy's a great player.
And you hold obviously so many NHL records, and I think probably what's most impressive isn't the number of records, but the gap between you and the person who's second. Maybe the most amazing stats that if you took away all your NHL goals, you would still be the leader in points in the NHL. But I was interested to read you a quote that somebody said and get your thoughts, and it's that, quote, "I always say he's the greatest player ever because he wasn't strong. As a matter of fact, he was kind of weak. He wasn't fast. He was just an average skater. His shot wasn't that great. He wasn't quick. There was no one thing you could point at and say, that's what makes him great. But he could put it all together like nobody else could." What do you think?
Who said that?
Hockey commentator.
My dad?
Yeah, no.
Well, listen, it goes back to what I said from the very beginning. When I was 6, I never changed my style of play. And I was fortunate enough that I worked on my craft from the time I was 5 years old to the time I retired at 39. And I knew what I had. I wasn't fast, and I wasn't strong, and I didn't have the hardest shot. But he's right. I did put it together in a sense that if there was a loose puck, I could get to a loose puck. My ability to have tremendous balance on my skates. I was hard to knock off the puck because I had great balance. Shooting the puck, I didn't necessarily have the hardest shot, but I could tell you, I could hit the exact spot that I wanted to shoot the puck to. So for me, those things all made me the player that I was. And then the preparation for a game, and I said this recently, we were really well coached in Edmonton, and yet I think that one of the big pluses for the Oilers and for the organization was that guys like myself and Mark Messier and Glenn Anderson and Yuri Curry and Paul Coffey, all guys who became Hall of Famers, we were like sponges. We wanted to be directed, and we wanted to be coached, and we wanted to be told, and we listened to it. And we took that direction as this is going to make us a better team and better players. And so all that cultivated into what we became, and I like to think that we were all a big part of that. And the era I played in, let's face it, I came in at the right time. And timing in life is a big part of it too. There was 21-team league when I came in. Probably would have been very difficult for me to make a 6-team league. I got 1 year sort of a stepping stone where I played in that WHA that wasn't as good as the NHL, but it was better than the American League level, so that helped me. The players that they put around us, Hall of Famers like Messier, Anderson, Coffey, Curry, and the style of play. Glenn Sather idolized and worshipped the Winnipeg Jets of the WHA days between 75 and 78 with Bobby Hull and Kent Nielsen and Anders Hedberg and Ulf Nielsen. He thought that was the way hockey should be played, and so he coached us that way. The game is different today. These players are bigger, they're faster, they're stronger, the goaltending's different. Who knows if I could even have played in this era, but I'd like to think that somehow I would have found a way.
Right. Tell about the trading jackets with a teammate and why there are people probably somewhere out there that think you can't spell your name right.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Well, you know, back in the 70s, probably even in the 80s, the world was a bigger place. You know, we didn't have a lot of TV cameras and a lot of pictures and all that goes with that. You know, I was kidding with my kids the other day because, you know, we were driving to an event and they can pull it up on their phone and it tells you how to drive right to that event. Whereas we go to hockey tournaments and we'd stop at gas stations and 7-Elevens, you know where this arena is or you know where this ballpark is. That's how we found our way around. And so you hear these myths about other kids. Oh, watch out for this kid, he's this, and this kid is going to be sensational, he's this. And because, although it was a bigger province, Ontario, a lot of the best teams ended up in sort of the same tournaments, whether it was a tournament an hour away or 2 hours away or 3 hours away. So it was always the same 8 or 9, 10 really good teams from Ontario that sort of squared off in these events. And ultimately, we usually got to the semifinals or finals. We had a really good team. We had 5 kids on my 10-year-old team that actually spent time in the National Hockey League, which is pretty remarkable for a town of only 50,000 people. But our goaltender, Greg Stephan, who played in the NHL, we looked a lot alike. We both had blonde hair, and in those days, it was a big thing. You had your number on your jacket. And so we traded jackets going into the arena. I said, you go into the arena first. And I said, you go get bugged, and I'm just going to walk in. So we switched jackets. He said, I'm never going to do that again. Because nobody really ever seen me, but they all assumed that I was him because he had my jacket on with number 9 on it.
Right.
So it was kind of funny.
And so he was hounded you
Yeah,
for
he said, we're never
autographs.
doing that again.
So explain why it got to a point early on, 12,
13
13 years old, where you
Yeah.
just didn't like being Wayne
Yeah.
Gretzky.
Well, I don't think it was a question. I didn't like being Wayne Gretzky. I didn't like being everything that went on around being Wayne Gretzky. In that sense, that the kids were great. You know, we had. Listen, when you're a little town, it's all the same kids on the ball team. It's mostly all the same kids on the hockey team, and a lot of the same kids on the box lacrosse team. So there was a good 10 or 11 of the 15 on each team that just played together on every team. So the kids and I, we really got along well. We had no issues, and actually the year I scored 400 goals is really ironic because the coach, who at the time was my uncle, my mom's brother. He came in one day and he said, I'm gonna put you on defense. You're gonna play defense. And I remember I was almost in tears and talking to my mom and dad at a dinner table with my uncle, and I don't want to play defense. And my uncle said, but listen to why I'm going to play you in defense. And I said, okay. We had 3 lines of forwards, 9 kids, and we had 2 sets of defense. And he said, you know, I can play you every second shift and nobody's going to be upset. Parents aren't going to complain. Kids aren't going to be upset. And I started thinking about it. I said, wow, this is, a great idea. I like this. And so I played defense that year because I could play every second shift. And what happened was the very first exhibition game, we had one of the 4 defensemen, and I'll never forget, the first period, he broke his leg sliding into the boards accidentally, broke his leg and basically missed almost the entire year, 6-7 months. So everybody said at that time, who are you going to add to the team for your other defenseman? And my uncle said, we're not going to add anybody. So I basically could play the whole game without taking anybody's ice time. So it worked out really well. And so the kids and I were fine, like I said. And as time went on, parents, would get envious, and some of the coaches I had at 13, 14 were didn't like maybe the style of play that I played.
And although it might have only been a few people,
Yeah.
those few people, what were they saying?
It's like anything else. The negative people are always the loudest. That I was overrated and I was spoiled and I'm not going to make it past 15. And so I remember out of the blue, I got this phone call from a friend that I'd known forever, and he said, how would you like to play in Toronto? And I said, absolutely, I'm in. So I said to my dad, after he called me, I said, hey, I'm going to go play in Toronto. And my dad kind of laughed. But as time went on that summer, he came down a couple times and explained to my dad what would be good for me. And as time went on, my dad started really thinking, okay, this might be the right thing to do. Let him kind of go be a normal high school student and normal kid and and my dad really felt that I would not struggle, but be more of an average player playing in Toronto where there's so many good players and so many good teams. I think he felt like it would obviously, progress me and make me a better player, but that I'd be more like one of the players instead of this sort of spotlight kid. And I think ultimately he just said, okay, this is probably the right thing to do. And ironically enough, when I went to Toronto the first day to meet and see the people I was going to live with, I had never met before. And obviously I ended up spending 2 years with them. They had one son who was 2 years older than me, who I periodically still see. But they became like second parents for me because they became legal guardians and almost like an adoption. And so obviously they became very close and became like second parents to me.
And this was an hour away from home.
It was an hour away from home, and it was tough. The first 3 months or 4 months was really difficult. I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Well, you were, I think, crying a lot.
Yeah.
And how hard was it not only on you, but your parents to make the decision to let you go?
Now I look back at it and I understand how difficult it was for them. It was probably harder for them than it was even for me. Because then I obviously went through it with my own kids. You have your kids and you want them home all the time. So no, I understood it was probably harder for them. It's probably even more difficult for my mom than even my dad. But turned out to be probably the best thing I ever did in my life and probably the most important thing I ever did, because I became much more of a normal child and blended in. People I went to high school the first year I was there didn't even know I played ice hockey.
Except I think there was a moment, and this might have been later on, but I thought this was interesting. You score 4 goals in a game, and one of your Toronto friends just unknowingly goes to the game and comes up to you the next day asking if that's you, and what do you say?
Well, it was ironic because to this day I'm still friends with him, and he was my closest friend in high school. And I didn't know a lot of kids there because I just moved to Toronto. It was a big city and big school. I think we had 900 kids in our school. And we became friends, but he never played hockey, and he was a football player, and I never played football, obviously, and I didn't know much about it. And he didn't know much about hockey, but one of his brother's friends was playing junior A hockey. So we went to see the game. It was a playoff game, and I actually played in the game. I think I scored 3 goals that night. And he asked me the next day at school, he said, "Was that you?" And I said, "Yeah, but don't tell anybody." But the secret kind of got out of the bag a couple months later.
But you were kind of being serious. You just didn't want that attention
because I was really
enjoying.
I really enjoyed myself in high school. I was just a normal 14-year-old that was going to high school. I had created some friends there and good friendships, and I was having fun at school, and I was enjoying the people I was around, and people really didn't look at me as this person who was in newspapers every day and media every day. And what really happened was when I went in September, they told me I couldn't play, and we went to court. So there was a lot of media that when I was in court trying to fight this, that I could do it, because kids in the past had done it. They were taking a stand that they weren't going to allow this anymore. And so, we lost. And then I said, well, what's plan B? And they said, well, we can take it to another level. And I said, no, I'm not enjoying going to court. This is kind of silly to me. I don't want to do this. And so I had 3 choices, and one was to go home. 2 was to play high school hockey. And at the time, high school hockey wasn't great in Canada. It was just okay. I felt like that'd be a real step backwards for me. And 3, play junior hockey. Obviously, I chose the junior hockey route, but as this all transpired in sort of September, October, November, the school that I was supposed to go to, the teachers were on strike. So really nobody knew I was in Toronto at the time, and nobody knew I was actually living in this area. So when I started back up in school, it was early January, that's when the media had kind of died down and people really didn't put it together. So I was able to kind of slip into the school and become a normal student for an entire year. So it was funny because I was such a big passer and believer in the game of hockey, passing the puck and all that. excuse me, and I was playing high school basketball, and the coach used to get mad at me because I threw up the basket. Every time I got the ball, I threw the ball. I never pass it. And finally one time he said to me, "Why don't you play basketball like you play hockey?" I said, "I didn't even know you knew I played hockey." So anyway, I ended up, after that first year, obviously people started to be aware of who I was.
I want to jump around some of the remaining moments I have with you. First, retirement. At what point in your career did you realize you had peaked, and how did you handle knowing your performance was starting to decline?
I don't think as an athlete you ever think you've peaked. I think you always believe that you're better at that age than you were. It's kind of a funny thing about professional athletes. I really believe at 39 when I retired that mentally I was a better player, physically I was a better player. With the knowledge that I had, I was a better player. Physical testing we would do before training camp or halfway through the year, my grades and my marks were better than they were when I was 21. But you don't have the same mindset at 39 that you do at 21. And so, as I say to people, when I was 21 years old, at physical fitness testing, I did 9 sit-ups and 10 push-ups and scored 92 goals. When I was 38 years old in training camp, I did the same testing. I did 125 push-ups and 150 sit-ups and scored 9 goals. So how does that relate to anything, right? So, I think you become a smarter athlete as you get older, but your sense of urgency is probably, as a professional hockey player, different for everybody. But from my point of view, I think from between the age of 34 and 33 was when I became the best player that I was in my career.
Why did you decide to retire when you did?
It was pretty simple. For me, it wasn't a hard decision, to be quite honest, in the sense that the game itself and playing for the Rangers and the organization, living in Manhattan, I loved every second of it. Mark Messier once said that there's not one thing about the game of hockey I don't love, and I was the same way, whether it was a hard practice after a bad loss, team meeting with the coaches, being together with the guys, riding on the team bus, traveling together, getting ready for a big game, playing in those big games. Everything about the game I loved. But from my point of view, I knew I was done because the older you get as a professional athlete, the more time that you have to put in the off season. Your commitment has to be nothing but short of excellent. And so I was fortunate enough that at about the age of 29, 30, I ran into a kid named Billy Blanks, who was a real big fitness guy in California and a real big believer in kickboxing and Taibo and training. And so he kind of took me under his wing in the off season. I used to train every morning from about 6:30 to 9:30. Each and every day, whether it was on a rowing machine, whether it was Taibo, whether it was weightlifting, we would do something pretty much on an average of 6 days a week. And the year that I retired, I just said, I mentally don't have the capacity to put that time in and that work ethic that I need to get ready for the next season. If I could just come back to the next season, start training camp, I would play. But I knew that physically and mentally I didn't have the strength and the willpower to want to put that time in that I needed to put in to be successful as a professional athlete.
And I think it was the day before your final game, the Rangers owner offers you a check for $1 million just to consider playing another year. You could have kept the $1 million and you considered it and said...
Probably the dumbest thing I've ever done, right? Without question.
I mean,
I always tell people this. There's nothing like playing in Manhattan. It really is special. And the Ranger organization is one of the greatest organizations, all the pro sports. And the Dolan family were nothing but just incredible, not only to me, but my family and my wife. And the day before I was announcing my retirement, Mr. Dolan said, just give it 7 days, and you still want to retire in 7 days, you can keep the money. And I said to him, in good conscience, I just can't take your money because I know I'm done. But that's how classy their organization was. They were just, I can't say enough good things about him personally and about that organization.
At any point since you've retired, has the thought of coming back crossed your mind?
Never. Geez, I think one time, about 2 or 3 years after I was retired, I was training at this fitness institute in Phoenix. And I was training pretty hard. It was like 3 hours a day, and I was doing it with a couple of the young Coyote players, and I was really having fun. And I remember it was about 4 weeks into it. After I do remember after the second day, I was so sore I had to get a massage for 2 hours because my body was so sore from not having done it for like 2 or 3 years. And I started getting phone calls from some Canadian media friends like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "Trust me, I am not coming back. That's not part of the plan. I'm just doing this for fun. I'm doing it to get in shape. I'm really enjoying myself. I'm 42 years old. That's not the recipe for a comeback in this day and age." So I never crossed my mind to come back. Although I would tell you, people say to me, "Do you miss it?" And I say, "Absolutely. I wish I could still play. I wish I could be out there." Unfortunately, as a professional athlete, at the age of 40, you're an old man, but in the real world, you're a youngster. So do I miss it? Immensely. And do I wish I could still play? Yeah, but I know I'm not good enough to play. And so for me, periodically, whether it's once or twice a year, I'll play, and I'll play in the odd outdoor old-timer game and things like that. I'm not a big believer in old-timers hockey. I'm not a big backer of that. But every now and then when they play the outdoor games, and I think it's good for the communities, I did one in Edmonton, I'm going to do one in Winnipeg, there's one in St. Louis. I just think they're good for the communities themselves, and they raise a lot of awareness for the sport, and they raise a lot of money for charity. But to play just every day in old-timer games, that's not for me.
When you retired from hockey as player and even later as an owner and coach, you were still, by all standards, a young man. How do you replace the satisfaction
You don't.
now that you got from
No,
the game?
you don't. I tell people this all the time. There's no way to replace the high and the excitement and enthusiasm I had as a professional hockey player. That's, without question, not replaceable. So you can't even try to. And if you try to, you're in trouble. The closest thing you can get to is you, like my mom and dad, you live your life through your kids. You know, whatever your kids are doing, you pull for them and you support them and you pray for them and you want them to succeed. And that's your high and that's your excitement and that's your enthusiasm. So that's kind of how you look for your vice, but nothing replaces the thrill of playing hockey.
What's an average day entail for you today?
Come and do interviews with you.
The highlight, obviously.
This is the highlight. I'm actually, and I never do a lot of this stuff, but I'm actually going to go, I guess you would say videotape because they don't film, an episode of The Simpsons this afternoon, which will be fun.
You?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So I keep busy, you know, like next week I'll be going to the World Cup, and I have a restaurant in Toronto, and, you know, I work for a couple of companies that I'll do a couple events for and go see some hockey games. But I keep relatively busy, and I don't go to a lot of hockey games. When I do go to games, usually it's when I'm at home in St. Louis. I like to go down the arena there because it's convenient for me, and they treat me really nicely there. The ownership is great to me and take care of my family and friends. And if I'm in Toronto every now and then, or I go to Edmonton for a game, but I go to only 3 or 4 hockey games a year. I don't go to a lot of games, and I enjoy watching them, but I just don't have a lot of time to go to games now. But I watch a lot on TV. I love watching the games. I have a great deal of respect for the athletes of today, and I think they're done a great job of not only playing our game, but helping sell our sport and taking it to another level. So I have a lot of respect for all of them.
What was involved with writing the book 99?
So, you know, for me, the people who know me, there's nothing in life I love more than the game of hockey. I mean, I know everything about the game. I grew up studying it. I idolized it. I used to go to the Hockey Hall of Fame and walk around for hours and hours just staring at equipment and players and names and stories. And so I just felt like, you know what, this is the 99th anniversary of the National Hockey League. Let's do something real fun and talk about the NHL. And so it's basically broken down in different elements, sort of the early years of the National Hockey League and sort of how it started and how we went from 2 periods to 3 periods, how the All-Star game sort of started and came about. And then to me as sort of a youngster, growing up and going to my first NHL game, watching the games on TV, collecting hockey cards, idolizing players like Gordie Howe and Bobby Hull, Bobby Orr. And then fortunately being lucky enough to play in the NHL and talking about Canada Cups and winning Stanley Cups, and then of course being in LA, and then New York and St. Louis. And then sort of me as a fan now, watching the games and being part of the Olympics in '02 and winning a gold medal and things like that. So it's just sort of a history of the game itself, from sort of different directions of not knowing obviously the beginning part because I wasn't alive, but then as a kid and then as a player and then post being a player, to really how great our game is and how nice the people are in the game, and just fun history of the National Hockey League itself.
What's the process of writing a book
Long.
like for you?
Long. And then the process itself, when it's done, that's the beginning, because then you got to go out and people want to talk about it and hear about it, and that's a good thing. But it's a long process. It was almost 2 years of sitting down and coming up with ideas and thoughts and stories. And obviously I'm not a full-fledged writer, but it's my words and my thoughts and my ideas, and sort of put them together and collaborate and get them on paper and sort of try to make it flow from beginning to end of what I had sort of envisioned in my mind of what I wanted kids. I wanted kids to kind of pick up the book and say, well, that's pretty cool about the NHL, or, well, one day I hope I can play in the NHL. So that was kind of the process.
Really a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure.